Yeah, there is an optimistic side, but I'm more concerned about the more pessimistic perspective about the quality of leadership.
Let's move on to that and let's talk about leadership. Right. So I suppose, Marcus, you're the only person at the moment working in out of the four of us working in a charity, so you'll have a different view. But for the rest of us, for all of us, what have we learnt about ourselves, either as consultants or, in your case, leading a team, Marcus, during this crisis, and what does that mean moving forwards for organisations, for consultants, and what can we learn from it?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there's masses of things I've learned, and I've learned about myself. I've learned about my leadership style. I've learned about the people I work with, and I think there's something I was reflecting on the other day, which is that interestingly, the fact that I think we're all in a crisis together, and there probably is also something to do with the fact that we're all sitting in our sitting rooms, bedrooms, wherever we're sitting. There's a level of humanity that's crept into the conversations and crept into the exchanges, and I feel like there are bonds that are being made in these unusual circumstances that would not happen if we're in the office. So there's a greater understanding and a greater appreciation of each other, and that's really powerful. And I think it's a foundation that will continue when we get out of here and back into the office together. So that's one thing. I think there's Steve mentioned wartime analogies. I think there is something about there's peacetime leadership and there's wartime leadership, and I think that for a very, very long time our sector has been in a context where peacetime leadership is the leadership that prevails. So that's the leadership of consensual. It's a consensual leadership. It's let's get everyone's views. Let's come up with a decision that everyone agrees with. And I think often what that basically means is there's a compromise. In this situation, I think what we're needing to do is adapt quickly. We need to be agile. We need to be decisive. We need to work without certainty. And we are drawing on insight, but as well as that, there's a lot of gut feel as to what's right, what's wrong, and that requires a different type of leadership. And that's probably more at the war end. And I think the reality is what our sector needs is leaders who can flex between the two. Yeah, leaders who know when to lead from the back, and leaders who know when they lead from the front. And it's important to lead from the front when you're going through uncertainty, because the reality is if you're standing at the bottom of a mountain and going, hey everyone, go up the top of the mountain and I'll watch you from behind, that's not going to motivate people. You've got to get out the front there and kind of go, okay, we can do it. We can get to the top of there. I know I've got the best team. I know we've got a phenomenal, machine behind us. So let's go for it, and let's go for it well. And I think that I think talks to actually having an attitude of positivity and having an attitude that yes, we will get through this. But as well as that, being very honest with your teams about the fact that it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. We're going to get knocked. We're going to get some things right. We're going to get some things wrong. That's fine, but we can get through this, and we will get through this, and we will come out the other end fitter and stronger. And I think when I look across many different sectors, it's sometimes hard to find that kind of that tonality of leadership coming through.
Thank you, that's helpful. Steve, anything to add?
I think that I completely agree with Marcus. I think that there is what worries me about what we're seeing now is the quality of the leadership that in lots of organisations is just not good enough. It's not able to respond in a crisis, and it wasn't able to lead in a peacetime environment. To be honest with you, and I think that's a real challenge. I think we've got to work out how now. What's kind of exciting about it is because it's being shaken up, people are having to respond. And what's great about those kind of moments is you do get to shake that tree a little bit. And Marcus, if you've got a scenario where you've got teams and people respond to it, I'm having conversations with people where I'm seeing people who aren't responding to it at all. And in this moment that they're not responding, and beforehand you knew they wouldn't anyway. So what are you going to do about it when you get out of there? You know, I'm a trustee of a great children's charity, and I've had really interesting perspective on that kind of leadership at that level, and how people who aren't fundraisers but actually are open, you know, to understanding how it works, how the finances work. They've been brave. You know, that kind of quality of leadership is the difference, and we have to find a way in which that can thrive. I think there are organizations who don't have it. And you said something about partnerships. You said something about, you know, the leading of the teams and then consultants and other operators. I do think, you know, in Canada, there's an agency in that, you know, a gang that I work with, they're great. But in the marketplace, they often call people who are not part of charities suppliers. And I think that's absolutely the wrong sentence and phrase. It's kind of the wrong thing. You know, we have to have a bigger, broader tent for organizations for purpose to work properly. We have to have the flexibility and the entrepreneurial approach that independence can bring. You know, those opportunities where you construct teams for short-term projects built on bringing the talent that you have in the right place together to solve something and then to move on to something else. It isn't always these fixed, monolithic kind of gangs that you have. They're important to hold, but we do have to learn that flexibility of moving in and out and around. And so we're partners. And, you know, I've never seen myself, whether I work directly for or outside, as ever being anything other than a fundraiser. I just have a different kind of perspective on what that role and how to play that role. And I think organizations are going to have to respond to it in that way. And that's an opportunity.
I think I spend a lot of time sitting in rooms and people talk about the way things work, the process, the system. This is how things work. And I think so much of this is about, you know, process is important. Systems are really, really important. But at the end of the day, it's about people. And it's about the mindset, and it's about the attitude. And you know, I rarely find people who get passionate about process, but I do find a lot of people get passionate about a purpose. And I think, you know, it's this crisis is taking us back into that.
Rob, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, just an observation, really, which may or may not spark response is I've spoken to a few charities who have been amazed at how quickly and effectively they've managed to get appeals out of the door during this crisis. Something which may have taken them 3 to 6 months to get out of the door previously, they've managed to get together and out the door in 2 weeks and achieve record responses. Now, often the conversation around that is, well, but these are unusual times. And of course, that is the case. However, what you've done internally is not physically affected by that. You can choose to operate that way at any time, regardless of what's going on outside. Now, then it may be unsustainable to work at that level of intensity, but where is the point between the 6 months that it normally takes and the 2 weeks you've just demonstrated it can be done in? There must be somewhere in between those two, which is somewhere between the wartime and the peacetime, and a kind of a pandemic protocol, which you can enact at any time.
Yeah, and I think what you picked, absolutely put your finger on there, is precisely the kind of thing that we are finding floats to the surface and emerges, and that is entrepreneurial ability. The organizations that look and feel bloated, that have people who follow that in the wrong kind of way, we all get frustrated about the decision-making processes in charities, inside or out, you know, and we overlay complicated points and, you know, actually in the middle of a crisis, you cut through it. And what entrepreneurs do outside of it, peacetime or wartime, is entrepreneurs cut through it anyway because they have to. They're always having to. So we have to find and learn what happened when we were able to get an appeal out in 2 to 3 weeks, and what we didn't need, and why people behaved and acted differently, and make them feel comfortable that they can do that again when need be.
But do you think this is linked to Marcus's point about consensus? Because I think, you know, one of my observations is that charities, exactly as Marcus said, charities like consensus. People get asked for opinions about lots of stuff, and actually what's happened in an emergency process is either people are excluded from that, or people have got very short windows to respond. So actually they only respond with, these are the two things that I think you need to revisit or look at or to amend. So some of this isn't really about entrepreneurialness. It's back to Marcus's point, which is actually I'm just going to take 10 people out of the loop.
Well, I think there is, I think in these situations there are some people who thrive and some people who don't. I think there's some people who go, oh my God, we're in a crisis, it's doom and gloom, the sky's falling in, and you start talking yourself downwards, and you start doing things that drive yourself and the organization downwards. And there's other people who go, actually, you know what, it's pretty shit. There's a lot of crap happening. There's a lot of things outside my control, but there's opportunity. And so I think there is a mindset. Now, whether that's an entrepreneurial person or not, I think, there is that. I think there's also something, though, that so I've got a fantastic mentor, and he drummed this into me quite some time ago. And there's an amazing book I read, which is called Willful Blindness, recommended to anyone. And basically, from a very young age, we're all brought up, it's when we're first born, childhood, formative years, primary school, secondary school, higher education, employment, to conform. And not only that, we are taught to seek out, and it's a human nature thing, to seek out things that conform with our own views, our own beliefs. And if you look at things such as systems, processes such as balanced scorecards, they measure conformity to a set of different measures. What we don't do is we don't listen for the divergent view. And actually that word divergency is a negative connotations, hasn't it? And actually, I think that outside of this crisis, one of the things I've always done is listen for the divergent view. And it isn't hierarchical. It's not the people who report into me. It could be anyone, anywhere within the organization who basically say, hang on a minute, there's another way of doing this, or hang on a minute, the thing you're not looking at is this, or hang on, the problem with that is this, or the opportunity is that. And I think in this sort of situation, I think it's really important to recognise who are those divergent voices and what are those divergent views, and act on them. And I think you're right, Alan. We have stripped back the number of meetings we have. We've stripped back how many people we can fit into a room for have a conversation. We've stripped back that consensual piece. We've also listened to the divergent view, and that's the divergent voice in ourselves, but as well as that within our teams, who basically go, there's another way.
I can't remember whose quote it is, but it's the one that keeps coming back to me at the minute, which is I think it might be Keynes, but it's when the facts change, I change my opinion.
Yeah.
And that feels like where we are with lots of stuff now. Those rules that we've talked about, or the facts that we have had them, have just changed, and so we have a different opinion. And actually, the problem is the people who aren't changing their opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing is the rules have changed. You're right, absolutely, and the rules have changed, but there are less of them, and it's kind of interesting. With less rules, there's more values and principles get driven, and principles seem to me to be far more powerful than a set of rules, because principles guide you internally as opposed to rules externally, and that's damn sight. And people are adapting. This is situational leadership. They're changing it. Those who can't wouldn't have anyway. And, and I think it's going to change. And I think we've got to find a way of capturing, in real time, the learning of this experience. We can't, I can see the moment when you can already see it as everything changes. You can see how things start to revert back to what was, rather than actually embracing what we've learned and what we might need to change as a result of that.
And I think that is so important, the point you're making there, Steve. And I think for two things, I think first of all, it'd be a real shame to kind of view this as a blip and unusual circumstances, and then people go back to how they were before. I think there's also something else, which is the world. Well, the UK will emerge from this changed. Some of those changes will be obvious. Some of them will be really quite fundamental and not obvious. And I think so for us as a sector to think that when we emerge from this we'll get back to normal, I think is just completely wrong. If we just think in terms of who would have thought we could all work from home and use technology to have meetings around the world and to have better communications and better connections than we had before. this is going to stay. The acceleration of that, the technology, the fact that Zoom and Teams are in a bit of an arms race as to what functionality they can bring out, faster. So consumption has changed, behaviours change. I think attitude will change, and I think we need to recognise those. We need to recognise it, and we need to adapt to it coming out of this.